your definition of crushing it only involves things that you care about. So for example, if all you care about is business, you could be making 20, 30, 50K a month right now, and in your own eyes, you are crushing it. That is true. But at the same time, how do you feel deep down?
Yeah.
When you go to bed, what are the emotions that are coming up? When you wake up, what are the emotions that are coming up? How's your social life? How's your relationship with family? How's your health? And again, we're not saying we mastered it all. What we are saying is the more holistic your definition of crushing it or success can be, the more fulfilled you will feel in your own life. And sometimes you need to expand that definition, which creates a short-term like dissatisfaction, because you start seeing, oh, I thought I was crushing it, but all these parts of me are actually unheard.
Yeah.
But then long term, you can understand how to build the right relationship between those parts and create the life where you not only make tons of money or travel or build your dream relationship or live a healthy life, but you also have an internal collective that is as peaceful as going to the beach in Thailand and just chilling out for a few days. Welcome to today's episode of the Data Driven Actualization podcast. I am here with Dr. Namer, and today we are going to talk about the secret to creating lasting transformation in your life and why the old way of trying to change your life is actually very outdated and unsustainable. So if you're someone who wants to change your life holistically without sacrificing your health, relationships, your income, and you want to transform in a systematic way, this is the episode for you to listen to. So Dr. Namer, any ideas on how we should start the podcast?
Yeah, let's start with some definitions to
All right. 90% just clicked off the
Yeah.
podcast episode, but I'll entertain the definition.
Just so that we can rigorously ground the argument that we're going to make
That's
in
right.
very concrete terms.
But will the arguments be as grounded as Petronas Towers?
Nothing is as deep as that foundation.
That's right. So what definitions do you want to start with?
Yeah, so ecosystems
Right.
and systems in general, what do we mean when we're talking about our life's ecosystem?
Mm-hmm.
Because technically, an ecological system
Mm-hmm.
is things like the Amazon rainforest that put people to sleep in class.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we talk about ecosystems and systematically changing things,
Mm-hmm.
what do we really mean to say? And how is this different from maybe more traditional approaches to self-development?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the first thing to look at there is our life is a systems of systems, right? And I think a lot of people treat their own transformation in a more linear way. So they think, okay, I'm overweight, I want to change the way I look, so I work with a fitness coach. And when I work with the fitness coach, I eat this many macros, I do these workouts, I eat less, I transform my body. Now, that's very useful in the sense of transforming the body externally. But if we don't see how that system of your health in general affects other systems like your relationships, your income, your well-being, the way you feel about yourself, then it can be very single focused. And what we mean by systems thinking is we look at the relationship between things and actually prioritize the relationship between different areas of life rather than looking at one area of life and isolating it. Because when we isolate something, we have a very strong assumption, right? Which is this area is assumed to be separate from everything else. But life never works that way. Like, for example, if you're someone who wants to lose weight, a lot of the time, the macros you need to hit, the workouts you need to do, but there's emotions involved, right? So maybe you spend a day where you feel lonely, you're not meeting your social needs, and that's actually what makes you overeat, and that's actually the reason that you gain so much weight to begin with. So when we look at something from a systems view, we can understand that a system is more than its parts, and that
Yeah.
And when those parts are combined together, the system gains different properties. So we cannot actually isolate the parts individually and then go, oh, yeah, and then when we combine with this, we have the system, because the system eventually develops its own properties, which can be taken more as a scientific idea. But in this podcast, we want to explore it more in terms of how this idea of ecosystem thinking can help you create sustainable change.
Yeah. And that has very, I guess, deep ties to the concept of holism,
Mm-hmm.
where you have to analyze a whole not by breaking it down into its individual pieces, which would kind of be the reductionistic paradigm, but instead having to see how all of them interact together
Mm-hmm.
to give rise to these emergent properties that arrive at higher levels of organization.
Right.
Um, and we see that in the human body all the time as well, as we have cells that can
Mm.
do a certain set of functions, but then once you start aggregating them together, they're
Mm-hmm.
able to do something wildly different compared
Mm-hmm.
to just one thing by itself. And when we talk about systems, what we really mean is a set of parts that are interacting with each other and influencing each other,
Mm-hmm.
but often in some kind of constrained way.
Right.
And when we talk about the system of our life, we mean all the different aspects of our life, such as
Mm-hmm.
our relationships, friendships, platonic, non platonic,
Mm-hmm.
our fitness, our family relationships, our career, but even our own internal systems.
Mm-hmm.
And we can always see them as being in constant feedback loops with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and when we start looking at the interconnections between all of them, we can start to modify the system in a much more effective way
Mm-hmm.
than if we would have just focused on one narrow piece and just ignored all the feedback loops.
Right.
So the reason we're going to dive into this systems-based thinking is because earlier on in my journey, I think a lot of times people would say, well, if there's a task you're having a hard time doing consistently, instead
Mm-hmm.
of doing it with willpower, just systematize it.
Right.
Um, and what we really wanted to touch on is these ideas we've been playing with
Mm-hmm.
ourselves around seeing the different feedback loops that all these mechanisms have, and really looking at this concept of your entire life holistically to create change that's a lot more effortless and lasting.
Right. Yeah. And I think, the power of doing that is once you start seeing the connections between different systems, then you may spend 10% effort, but that effort might create 90% of the change.
Yeah,
And I think that's where a lot of people have this fallacy that working on one part of your life always needs to be an uphill battle. It's like there's these voices in our head that we always need to prove wrong, and that's the definition of courage, or that's the definition of a successful life, is when you can overcome these voices. And one of the big messages that we stand for is you can also build a relationship to these voices and actually understand how they were created to begin with, which will allow you to build a more peaceful mind over time. And that will help you with other systems of your life. Because then, when you speak to a stranger, you're not going to feel like, oh, they probably think I'm a boring person. You're actually going to be able to listen into what they're saying. And because you're listening more, you'll become more charismatic because there isn't
yeah,
as much internal chatter in your own mind. So, this is how seeing the relationships between different things can allow you to create an approach that's a lot more sustainable and effortless long term. And we're not here to say like we've mastered everything, right? It's not like we're walking around with six packs, but what we are saying is looking at fitness with the definition of it's just a six pack is also a very reductionistic approach. And in that sense, what we have mastered, me and Nomer collectively, is I've spent years of my life speaking to strangers in tons of different situations, meeting people from different countries, understanding more about attraction and psychology and what really makes people tick. And then the last few years of my life, diving deep into meditation and internal work and shadow work. And Numair is really skilled on the system skills, which is like, building holistic health and productivity and lifestyle design, being able to zoom out and see your lifestyle in a way where you create these productive systems that have good feedback loops with each other, so that collectively him and I can help you create the life that you want for yourself. And I think that's where our expertise really comes in. And what we see is a lot of the time, people think their problem is one thing. But to change that one thing, you need to change everything about your life. But if you go to a coach just for that one thing, very few people have the ability to zoom out and to see your life in a systematic way. So they might recommend you stuff that gets you the result 3 months down the line, but then in a health example, right, that may completely mess up your metabolism. So you spend the next 2 years trying to make up for that, although you got the results you wanted. Or with dating, you may get to the results that you wanted and then realize, oh, actually, what I truly wanted was to build a loving relationship with myself. So that's where having a system-based approach to change is very meaningful, because then you're moving in one direction smoothly, and it can look sometimes slow, but it's very intentional.
Yeah. And to add to this idea of systems, it's, everyone online has like my 7-step system for
That's right.
doing X, or 3-step system for achieving Y in
Success.
location X.
That's right.
But when we talk about systems, we look at it more as looking at life as a system of different systems. So it's kind of a system within a system that's connected to other systems. Mm-hmm. So you can still have someone come and tell you, use my conversational system to accomplish this goal, which technically should be called an algorithm, but no need to be nitpicky here. But you can still have that system, but because it's not put into perspective with the other systems at play, you can still have one system of your life that takes care of the conversation, but putting the conversation system in the context of what voices are going on in your head when you're putting that system to use. Right. What's that internal system, and how is that interacting with your conversational system? That perspective is very, very important, because one thing I've found is in a lot of fields, there's a lot of people who have much, much deeper knowledge than me, right, in that individual field. But because I could zoom out a lot and see the connections, a lot of times I was like, okay, I actually don't need to go that deep. Right. As someone else in that, as someone else in that field. But because I see these other connections, I can still have a positive impact and still reach the goal that I need to. Right. And so in that way, knowing which skills to acquire is a skill in itself. Yeah. And that's what systems thinking allows you to get really good at. It gives you the wisdom to know, okay, what's something worth investing in and spending time with versus what's something that's not the highest ROI. So I think classic example, single digit body fat. It's, if we'd never worked together, it probably would have been very easy to spend, the next 10 years working towards that 9% body fat. Right. But once you kind of zoom out, it's kind of like, how important was it really in my own personal journey? Not too much, just because I knew for where I wanted to be, I didn't need, that wasn't a skill that I needed to develop. Right. And, massive respect to people who do it and their discipline and consistency. But I realized for where I wanted to go, that was just something that was an unnecessary skill. And so I could use my time building other skills that were more relevant to the goals I wanted. Right. And in many ways, that's what I find to be so advantageous about systems level thinking and zooming out, is that it gives you the wisdom of knowing which roads to pursue without always needing to know all the details about them as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that comes up even with coaching, right? Is a lot of times, I think, we've chatted about this. I'll be like, I want to make the bad decision
Right.
because I want to know exactly, I want that experiential
Mm-hmm.
aspect of making the bad decision
Mm-hmm.
and then get the wisdom versus even if you may not have made that bad decision yourself,
Mm-hmm.
you can see maybe the shadow pattern around that bad decision
Mm-hmm.
and being like, okay, well, I just felt like I was the good boy growing up always, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why I want to do this. And then
Mm-hmm.
you can, from a place of wisdom, understand, okay, I don't have to experientially experience every bad decision to
Right.
know that this isn't something I should do. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't even need knowledge of that exact situation,
Mm-hmm.
but because I understand the different systems at play, my internal system
Mm-hmm.
combined with the external systems, you can kind of take a step back and say, okay, this is not worth doing. And
Yeah.
that's something I find very advantageous of that zooming out, eagle's eye, systems level thinking approach.
Yeah, and I think if you're unable to zoom out, it also wastes you so much time.
Yeah.
That's where we see people working for years in a career that they don't like and maybe making tons of money, but not feeling very good deep down, knowing that this is not the life they want to live.
Yeah.
Or, like you said, people pushing really hard for that single digit body fat, thinking that will be what's attractive to women they're trying to meet, and then realizing all they're getting is some compliments from
Yeah.
guys being like, dude,
Dude, big
how'd you,
craps.
yeah,
Yeah.
dude, how are you lifting this weight, right? And that's when they realize 5, 10 years down the line, okay, they optimized for the wrong goal. And again, we're not necessarily attacking anything here. Like, if your pure goal is, hey, I want to see how I look in this physical shape, then great, pursue that. If it's meaningful to you, like, all the power to you. What we are talking about is how can we create a life that optimizes for quantity but also quality.
Yeah.
And it doesn't sacrifice quality for the sake of quantity, because I think with this mechanistic view of how science was broken down for years, of like Newton's laws of physics, and then if you do this to a mass, force is equal to mass times acceleration, really like straight rules like this created a very limited worldview, and that almost like that affected the way language was even used around the different things that we see, right? That's why, what do people want? A pathway or a flow chart. It's always linear stuff, usually, when people are asking for advice, and that linearity in thinking doesn't account for, okay, here's a step-by system, but how do you feel about it?
Yeah.
Like, is this actually optimizing for who you are? How does it feel to you? And being able to build that qualitative understanding of how your life is improving, and at the same time being able to celebrate that qualitative development. I think that's what looking at relationships between things really helps, both in your internal world to see, okay, there's a part of me that was used to being the good boy for a long time, and that part was actually repressing a different part of me who wanted to say yes to adventure and see the world and charge around and maybe enjoy some chaos. Now, how can I allow that part to express itself without having that part just take over for 5 years?
Yeah.
Because that's also what a lot of people do. Even your experience staying at a hostel for a couple of days and seeing that for a lot of people, the idea of fun is saving up some money and just taking a year off, spending 15, 20K, however it is, traveling in Southeast Asia, staying at hostels, just drinking, partying, doing whatever. But then, like, having a lot of dopamine hits, but not the deep level of fulfillment.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, when we can have a systems view, when we can also be around people, work with people who have that, it's like they can allow us to make the mistakes that we kind of want to make to understand life, but not have that mistake hurt us as much in the long term.
Yeah. And I'd say it's, if you zooming out also helps in a very classic kind of trap I see people fall into is, oh, I made 2 mil, but I'm not happy. So
Right.
clearly the solution is to make 5.
Yeah.
Or it's kind of like, oh, I've started having success with women, but I'm not happy. Clearly, I now need to like whatever the more extreme version of their
Right.
like fantasy is.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say explicit stuff on the podcast.
That's right. Keep
Or-
it PG friendly.
Yeah, or people would say, okay, I got to a single digit body fat, but now are my shoulders to waist ratio 1:618? No, okay, let's keep going.
Right.
And so unless you zoom out, it's very easy to still be on that singular path, not feel happy, and think, okay, the way to feel happy is just more
More of the
of
same.
that. Yeah. Versus if you can zoom out and see, okay, why didn't I become happy?
Mhm.
And really start to look at the interactions between all the different parts of your life,
Mhm.
then you can act with a lot more wisdom instead of really going down a path where, let's say, you want to lift more, you keep lifting, lifting, you're still not happy at some point. Maybe
Mhm.
some dysmorphia kicks in. Like it's very,
Yeah.
you can have a lot of troubling things come up there because it's easy to fall into comparison there as well of,
Mhm.
okay, now I've been doing this for so long, I've gotten this, but there's always some guy who's going to be bigger.
Right.
Okay, now I need to like be bigger than that guy. Or
Mhm.
it's easy to be like, okay, now I need to end up on a yacht in Miami with like multiple supermodels in my arms.
Right.
It's very easy to go down that path.
Mhm.
And so when you can zoom out, you're also saving yourself time as well.
Yeah.
And then you're also saving yourself a lot of suffering because you can understand what level of accomplishment is enough for you.
Right.
Because I think that was something that lately in my life saved me a lot of time.
Mhm.
Was looking back at my athletic career, I was not world number one.
Mhm.
At some point, I wanted to be, and there was a level of peace, restlessness around unfulfilled potential.
Mm.
But then when I thought about it in the context of my life
Mhm.
and seeing how it already contributed to everything else, I was like, I'm very happy with where I got, even if
Right.
other people may not have been happy, because I knew people, who were almost at the very, very best in the world. They may
Mhm.
not have been happy, but that was enough for me. And it's the same with even like building dating skills.
Mhm.
I knew I got to a point where I was happy with things. And will there be someone in the world who's always like better, more experienced, blah, blah, blah? Sure. But
Mhm.
as long as I was happy with where I was and it got me where I wanted,
Mhm.
that was what became more important.
Yeah.
And so when you can look at things in the context of systems, you also start to learn to optimize for the right things.
Right.
And this doesn't mean there's not more to learn and no scope to improve,
Mhm.
or there's no desire to improve. It's just that when you can look at almost your life's utility function for the
Mhm.
entire system versus the utility function for one piece,
Right.
you have a lot more wisdom because your utility function balances all the different trade-offs,
Mhm.
as opposed to staying at home and reading multiple encyclopedia after encyclopedia on
Mhm.
what's it, the manual, the Bin's book.
Right.
And so when you can look at things from a systems point of view, you're making your transformation smoother, but you're also setting the goals that are more relevant to your life.
Right.
And I think that's something else that's very powerful as well, because it came up in my research career as well. Do I have a Nobel Prize? No, but I'm very happy with where my research skill kind of got me,
Yeah.
and the level of access of knowledge it gives me,
Mhm.
even though probably never winning a Nobel Prize.
Hey, don't speak too soon.
Yeah.
You never know. Yeah, and I think that's very powerful because as you create your way of finding happiness in the process and you realize the level of control that you have about how you feel about your life in general, then it also allows you to create a life where you're no longer relying on other people's validation. And this was a big thing that kind of clicked for me in the past few years as well. You know, if you've been following this channel, some of you guys might know I was coaching dating for a while, right? And what happens when you coach a subject like that is people start looking up to you in some ways because they want to be like you. And it took me a lot of reflection to say, actually, this is no longer what I want to do. Because in a way, you build this lifestyle where you can go wherever you want. And then you're basically paid to be a fancy promoter for guys that you hang out with and to help them in different social situations.
Yeah.
So in a way, like, people just want you to exist and be around them, which can create a deep validation cycle for the life that you're living. But then the thing with that, after some time, is I realized, no, actually, I don't want to go on a date. I'd rather go meditate for 2 hours and explore the intricacies of the mind, and that's more important to me. So I had this split between, oh, but this is what my career and my coaching requires me to do, and this is what I really want to do. And part of what we've been able to do through the transition itself was realizing, how do we align our individual goals to the way that we contribute to our life. And I think that's, again, another way in which zooming out can bring you more happiness, both in the short term and in the long term. Because I could have just said, oh no, maybe I need more money, or maybe I need a deeper following, maybe I need, I don't know, more successful clients, so I finally know I have the best program in the world. But actually just going and seeing that, okay, this vehicle has served me very well up to this point, but this is no longer the life that I want to live, is a very powerful place to be. And again, this approach is not for people who are struggling in life. It can also help people who are seeing tons of success. Because what happens is when you have tons of success, your life moves so fast, is until you have an outside perspective.
Yeah.
And when I say that, like, if you're at a certain level of development where you can identify different parts inside yourself, which usually comes when you start being able to see how culture affected your own development, and you can look at other cultures and see, like, even what we saw today at the restaurant, right? You're like, hey, can we have 2 minutes? We haven't decided yet. And the guy was just standing there, and he was like, sure. And you were like, bro, what's going on? It's just a cultural difference in the way people understand that word and that way of communicating. Once you're able to see that, you can identify different parts in yourself. And if you can do that, then you can also ask yourself to give yourself perspective. But if you can't do that yet, that outside perspective might be a mentor, a coach, a community that you can be a part of. Because that perspective is exactly what will show you what can lead you to success, not just the next month, but in the next 3, 6, 12 months, so that you're moving smoothly towards the life that you want to create. So don't think this is just for people who are feeling stuck or not feeling good enough. This is also for people who are crushing it in life, but who understand that if I'm crushing it, life is moving really fast, right? And for me to catch up, that outside perspective can be the thing that grounds me into keep seeing the success, and actually reveals to me the stuff that I don't see.
Yeah.
Because your definition of crushing it only involves things that you care about. So for example, if all you care about is business, you could be making 20, 30, 50K a month right now, and in your own eyes, you are crushing it. That is true. But at the same time, how do you feel deep down?
Yeah.
When you go to bed, what are the emotions that are coming up? When you wake up, what are the emotions that are coming up? How's your social life? How's your relationship with family? How's your health? And again, we're not saying we mastered it all. What we are saying is, the more holistic your definition of crushing it or success can be, the more fulfilled you will feel in your own life. And sometimes you need to expand that definition, which creates a short-term like dissatisfaction, because you start seeing, oh, I thought I was crushing it, but all these parts of me are actually unheard.
Yeah.
But then long-term, you can understand how to build the right relationship between those parts and create the life where you not only make tons of money or travel or build your dream relationship or live a healthy life, but you also have an internal collective that is as peaceful as going to the beach in Thailand and just chilling out for a few days.
Yeah. And for people, if it's one thing, if you're fully aware of all of these questions and you've asked all of them, and then said, okay, but still only crushing it in this one part of life is fine, then, power to you. I think it's more important to have that awareness and then make whatever decision you choose to make, and really building that awareness of the different parts, listening to all of them, and then coming up with whatever decision feels right for you is what we're talking about. And I wanted to touch on a very good point you made around, even for people who are very successful, seeing that outside perspective and is very, very important, because I remember during my PhD days, kind of because of where I was doing my PhD, there was a rich history in the institution of massive medical discoveries, Nobel laureates, and even our circles were scientists who were getting big, big awards, right? So from a pure perspective inside the circle, it was very easy to feel like, dude, I'm so behind. Because it's kind of, if you're surrounded by like Einstein and Oppenheimer the whole time, you're just like, what have I even done in my life? I'm like,
it's like, have you seen that one guy who graduated from Harvard, went to the Army Navy SEALs, and then became an astronaut? And one of the comments was like, I
feel
hope
bad
this
for
is
his-
not my neighbor.
Yeah, exactly, right? And that's where, from the when you get an outside perspective, it's very refreshing, because it's easy to see, okay, even though I may not be the most successful, I am still doing well, and I'm doing my best, and then starting to cultivate definitions of success around whatever suit you better, as opposed to whatever someone else's yardstick is. Because especially when you're doing well, I found that it's even easier to get stuck in nothing will ever be enough, more so than when you're stuck. Like if you're already successful, chances are you're around other very successful people, and that's when it's easy to get caught in that race of nothing will ever be enough. And that's
in
when,
a way, part of the identity that made you successful was that part who wanted to avoid the pain of being a failure. And that's why that part can feel so familiar, but it's something to let go of eventually. At least if you're optimizing for quality of life along with like quantitative goal. I think this was, one of the quotes, I don't remember who said it initially, but it's like one thing that's common around very, very successful people is this deep sense of insecurity. And I remember thinking, yeah, that's true, but that's only success in the material realm. And most likely these people are not feeling very happy deep down when they're living their day-to-day life. So I think understanding that, okay, maybe there was a part of me that was feeling insecure, who was afraid of not being successful, and that part got me here. That's great in the sense that you got the results you wanted to a certain extent, but that part doesn't need to keep existing. It's something you let go of, just like, I don't know if you had this, but I had times in my life where my mom was picking the clothes that I was wearing in high school or middle school, and I would just be like, all right, this looks good, whatever, right? But eventually, what do? A certain set of clothes becomes something that no longer fits into your vision of who you are, the life that you want to lead, and eventually you let go of that. Maybe you donate it, maybe you give it to someone else. And what that does is, you're able to build yourself a new, deeper identity. And you can do the same thing with different beliefs. And with certain parts inside yourself, is you can understand when it's time to actually let go of that to upgrade your life to an even deeper level.
And to clarify, this isn't about lowering your goals to to do the same things and feel happier about them. It's really about having an honest conversation
Yeah.
with yourself about what you really want. Because for me, when I had the honest conversation with myself around why do I want to be a professor at an Ivy League school, it
Mm-hmm.
was like, well, so that I can show all the people who I went to like 11th and 12th grade with, who
Mm-hmm.
gave me grief, that I can like do much worse than them and still end up at like quote unquote the pinnacle
That's
of
right.
whatever ladder, right?
The pinnacle of success.
Yeah. And then part of me was like, wait, they're living their life happily. It's time
Right.
I
They
just
don't
go,
care.
yeah, they don't care. If anything, they'd probably just be happy to see me and hang out. Like,
Right.
who cares, right? And so there it wasn't, was that a goal? Because that wasn't a goal I was pursuing anymore. It wasn't really about lowering the goal and redefining success with weaker criteria. It really was redefining success in line with what I really wanted, as opposed to
Yeah.
chasing someone else's dream or
Mm-hmm.
chasing society's dream. And
Mm-hmm.
I think really redefining success in line with what you want can often only come from, only can be a strong statement, but I found in my experience comes from zooming out, seeing how
Mm-hmm.
the different parts connect, and seeing, okay,
Mm-hmm.
what's the, if I want to get this aspect of my life to this kind of level of sophistication, maybe I have to trade off these things. For
Mm-hmm.
example, as a professor, you're trading off 6 years of your life for
Mm-hmm.
a level of tenure. And I was like, that's a trade off I'm just not willing to make.
Right.
Similarly, single digit body fat, you're like, well, I got to trade off ice cream, or in, I guess, without the jokes, a lot of discipline, metabolic health, being
Mm-hmm.
able to chill with your friends a lot of times.
Mm-hmm.
That I knew I had to make that trade off. And I was like, no, that's not an authentic one.
Right.
Same with professional athletic career. And
Mm-hmm.
so when you can zoom out and look at it from a systems view and look at it as the ecosystem of your life, you're really tapping into a high level wisdom based framework, because you're
Mm-hmm.
looking at how everything affects everything
Mm-hmm.
and then seeing what you're willing to accept and not willing to accept.
Yeah.
And is that the interpenetrative? Is that how what interpenetrative means in that
Yeah. In some
context?
ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the things that are important for people to implement this as well is to just expand the length of time they're looking at their life with.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that inspired us to build the community that we run now. So you might be thinking, okay, I resonate with this idea, but how do I actually implement it? And I think we can talk a little bit about how we help people implement it,
Yeah.
because it will look different for everyone. And again, like, as much as I wish there was a way to say, yeah, do these things, like, this is not just a 30 minutes or even like
Yeah.
a 5 hour podcast episode. This is a process that goes deep and deep into your life. But the first thing is expanding your time horizon, right? So, for example, before we started the Data Driven Actualization community, um, which is the community we run to help guys build a life they want without sacrificing their peace and authenticity. I used to run dating programs. 4 months was 10K, right? That was the price. And I think it's very common that a lot of coaching is very high ticket. So it may be like a 3 month program for 5K, 6 month program for 8K, even a 12-month program for 15, 20K, whatever it is. And I think what that creates in the ecosystem of mentorship is, first of all, people sign up to something, they don't get the results they want, and then they have less trust to coaches.
Yeah.
Secondly, it creates this idea of program chasing, like, oh, I'm going to join this program, and that's when I get results. But if we look at people who keep crushing it in life in all aspects, it all comes down to what you do day to day. So, in that sense, what you do in one day is very meaningless, but it's also very meaningful. It's very meaningless in the sense that if you miss one day of meditation, one day of workout, you don't need to treat it as
As
the
the
end
end
of
of
the
the world.
world and beat yourself up and make it a big deal. But at the same time, the actions you do day to day really compound. That 30-minute meditation, that one workout, that 10, 15 minutes spent observing the patterns of the mind is what sets you up for an amazing life 5, 10 years down the line. So when we created our community, our goal was, how can we create something that meets our financial needs so we can live the life that we want, at the same time is affordable enough so people don't just join it for 1 week or 1 month or 3 months or even a year. They become a part of it for 5, 10, 20 years. So eventually they can be like, hey bro, I just got married, like come to our wedding. You guys really changed my life. Because that's very meaningful, right? At least to us, to help people at that depth. And I think, one of the powerful things with that perspective is seeing that there's no need to rush yourself to get the result tomorrow or the next week or the next month. You can actually give yourself time. And sometimes that means spending like 2, 3 months just looking at the systems of your life.
Yeah.
And if you're always like, doing a fitness program for 3 months to get this results, doing a dating program for 3 months to get this results, doing a career coaching program for 3 months to get this results, you're always going to be chasing stuff. And that's when also people get to this never-ending cycle of seeing some results in one area. Maybe
Yeah.
they do the fitness program, they get in shape, but the system of their life is still the same, and that pulls them back into homeostasis. Whereas when we expand how far into the future we look as we're planning stuff, we can change the homeostasis of the system so that success becomes a default state, which looks a lot slower in the short term. But on year 1, year 3, year 5, year 10, it's like a compounding graph.
Yeah.
And most people don't do that, and that's why they're stuck. And doing that requires this ecosystem thinking of looking at your life and seeing every single part is connected to the whole, and you can't remove one part and optimize that without creating problems in other parts of your life.
Yeah. And that actually brings us to the second way of implementing more systems level thinking in your life, is really looking at whenever things didn't go as planned, looking at it more in the context of the whole. And I think this for me came up when I started analyzing days where I didn't eat so well, instead of making it about, oh, I didn't have the willpower today. Oh, I just need to like power through and be more disciplined tomorrow. I thought it's quite similar to identifying the trigger. It was, okay, how did the rest of the day go and how did all the events happen? And then it's like, well, flight was delayed, workout was extremely exhausting. I went home and I tried my best to have good ingredients at home, but home was empty. And then it's okay. And then I went to this different restaurant where I was hoping to get the right meal, and that just didn't. And then I had to go to McDonald's. And at the end of the day, okay, I went to McDonald's, but then I got the best possible option available there instead of just rampaging like some nuggets and fries. And so when I looked at that a lot more holistically, it was easy for me to go, wow, I actually, you know what, given how difficult the circumstances were, I made a very good decision, given I did the best that I could,
Right.
versus going, oh, I didn't do this optimally, therefore I did it wrong, therefore I don't have discipline.
Yeah.
And so when you really start to look at these things through a super interconnected lens, things really start to, there's a lot more self-compassion and peace, but then a lot more effective addressing as well. Because something I realized was, if I just kept trying to wing my macros and rely on willpower to not eat the right thing, that was going to be a miserable 3, 4, 5, 6 months or however long I would be cutting. Versus if I just had a system that there was always healthy food near me, or good food available in my fridge, then it just took no willpower and I could still work towards my goal. And I think it's quite similar even with socializing. Is if you look at it just in the concept of socializing, it's like, today wasn't so great. But then when you look at it in the whole picture, it's like, well, all these things went south, but I still showed up and took action,
Right.
that's good enough for me. And so when you really can start to see the interconnectedness of everything, and I think that's where things like building your schedule and choosing activities in a way where you're naturally put around people, that makes socializing so much more effortless, because you don't have to like silence that inner voice and charge across the entire street across 3 lights just to make
Right.
something happen if you're kind of just around people already.
Yeah.
And so that's where you can really use systems to set yourself up for success.
Yeah, and I think that's where having a community of similar like-minded people really helps as well, because in a way that's a system of its own, right?
Yeah.
The people you're around, and that doesn't have to be physically the people you're with, that can be people around the world who share the same mental ecosystem that you do,
Yeah.
so that you can start speaking the same language. You can start seeing, okay, people have actually been through the same difficulties that I'm going through right now. That makes me feel a lot more included, actually a lot more human,
Yeah.
to struggle with something that I felt like I wasn't supposed to struggle with.
Yeah.
And I think that's where people overestimate the importance of information and underestimate the importance of a community.
Yeah.
Because to really integrate information, like to really know something, is not just, oh, I read this in a book and now I say it and now I know it.
Yeah.
It's like, can you embody this teaching?
Yeah.
And embodying teachings also involves being around other people who are embodying those teachings, because you are the average of the 5 or 10 or 20 or however many people you spend the most of your time with. So if you want change to just effortlessly spill into your life, be in a community who's prioritizing this, who's respecting this path, and actually be a student of the path itself, right? Don't just crave an end goal to reach here or to reach there or to do this, but ask yourself, how can I study this path in this life in the best way that I can, and, you know, extract what I want out of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a long-term perspective combined with a community is very powerful, because information is readily available all the time, everywhere. But knowing what information to trust,
Yeah.
that's a real skill. And also seeing how that information affects other people's lives is very important. Because you can read something, you can think, oh, wow, this must be true. You try it and you realize, okay, this didn't work the way I wanted. But from there, the story you create can be different based on the people that you're around, right?
Yeah.
You may approach someone you're interested in a coffee shop, and maybe you're around a friend who's very negative about dating and speaking to strangers. You go say something, and the other person's like, oh, thank you so much. I actually, I'm working, so I can't really speak right now. You come back, and your friend's like, see, I told you this was never going to work. Or you're around someone who's actually put themselves in a situation like that many, many times, and they can go, oh, see, they were super positive.
Yeah.
They just had to get back to work.
Yeah.
And that will shift what actions you take from that moment forward. If you're in a community for a long term, that happens every single time. So it's like this small effect in the moment, just like a small change in the angle of a line. But then if you expand that, you just end up somewhere completely different.
Yeah, and I think James Clear makes that point with the flight of an airplane, where if it's flying from one end of the country and the nose is changed just by 3 degrees, you end up in like a drastically different, the country being the United States.
Right.
I
Not
forget.
Luxembourg.
But if you fly from one end and you change even slightly 3 degrees, you end up in a completely different city. That's how, even though these changes might feel little in the moment, they actually really compound and make a big difference in where you end up. And the point you said about information versus embodiment is also very important, because there's the classic bit of information that things are causes and conditions and that things are impersonal. which technically anyone could say, well, I know Newtonian mechanics, I know biology, therefore I fully know this, what things mean to be causes and conditions, therefore I am fully like whatever the call it level of accomplishment you want to, I am fully enlightened.
I'm a being of supreme intelligence.
Versus it's one thing to spell them out from a purely intellectual standpoint. It's another to be in a very triggering situation, be incredibly annoyed at someone, and then still go, okay, I see how like the causes and conditions gave rise to this, and I'm not here to say I'm perfect at that, but all I'm saying is, with many things, it's quite easy to think we know them from an intellectual perspective,
Right.
but actually embodying them is a much deeper practice, and it's almost a much more emotional practice that takes a lot more than just a surface level understanding of things are cause and conditions because of this psychological effect combined with this statistic combined with this phenomena, and that's the causes that led to this particular outcome.
Yeah. If you feel like you know something intellectually, but that change is not reflected in the way you live your life, then you don't truly know it.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the most humbling things we can all realize. And that's when like we can start understanding to know something isn't just a binary 0 or 1.
Yeah.
There's depth to the knowledge, and to build depth you want to practice the same thing for 1, 3, 5, 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
And that's again why we built this community, right? Because the foundational practices we give people are quite similar. And what do we see? The people who have success, they don't care if they're having a boring day. They don't care if they're having a bad day. They may still miss stuff here and there, but 90% of the time, they're doing the same things over and over again.
Yeah.
And what happens? 3 months down the line, hey, I got a new job with a 50% pay increase. That's amazing. 6 months down the line, oh, I just got into a relationship. Like these things happen because of consistency. And what people try to do is they just try to get that end result without building the consistency, thinking they already know what they should know. But what, again, a systems view of life, really ecosystem thinking is the concept we're trying to get across. What that allows you to see is actually, I don't know as much as I think I know. And being around similar people who can reveal my blind spots, who can show me what they know, how this knowledge looks like, not just in their experience, but also in their embodiment.
Yeah.
This is how I truly changed my life. And that's a very valuable system in itself for people to utilize. And I think that's where, I was reading Systems View of Life, right? And one of the things that he said was when countries invest in education, the return is almost 100-fold.
Yeah.
Versus investing in like railways or infrastructure or things like that. And I think, unfortunately, what's happening to the coaching industry is a lot of marketers just came through and they knew marketing, they didn't know how to coach, and that just commoditized the coaching space as a whole.
Yeah.
And now, with reason, people don't trust in knowledge as much. But I'm hoping that, by listening to this podcast and seeing us explore these topics, you can see we're trying to pass on our true knowledge here. And there's also tons of value in having a mentor-mentee relationship in your life and being a part of a community, exploring all these topics, because this is how you build deep embodiment. Like if you look at philosophers, right? They were actually in the whole same circle. Like I don't quote me on this because I don't know the exact people, but like Socrates was friends with Aristotle, and this was friends with this, and this person
They used to
was
wrestle
this person.
together or something like that.
Yeah, this person was this person's mentor. They actually spent so much time
Yeah.
together, and that's how they became the most influential thinkers for hundreds of years to come. And if that's the life that you want to create for yourself, it's an extremely high ROI activity to find a community, to find mentors, and to be in that space, to even just exist so these teachings can keep coming, right?
Yeah.
And that's where, again, having this ecosystem thinking can set you up for that, because now you're not trying to get the result right away. You're actually able to step out, look at your life in the long term, and start tinkering with the system to create the most optimal change quantitatively and qualitatively.
Yeah. And a couple points there in terms of when you talked about truly embodying knowledge versus just seeing it as information, actually, the point of like learning bachata came to my mind because I realized even though, for example, I may quote unquote know the same move as my instructor, when you see the instructor do it, there's so many like 10 little things that they do that make it clearly look very professional.
Right.
And then, even on the flight, I was watching videos to get ready for some
Nice.
Latin dancing. And I realized just because I've seen the video and I can say, okay, step one is this, step two is this, it's one thing to be able to list that. It's another to fully be in that experience and then do all the like arm twisting around and fully nail it.
Yeah.
And so, really building that experiential knowledge and embodied knowledge is very different than purely an intellectual knowledge. And then I think the other piece you touched on very nicely is tinkering with the system, because when we can tinker with the system and be aware of all the different feedback loops, we can start propagating the change everywhere.
Right.
And it's almost
It's like pushing an update to what's it called, a remote update?
Yeah. Okay. To a server that
Yeah.
distributes it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's where maybe a milder version of this saying is how you do one thing is how you do everything.
Right.
But here, and in many ways, I think that's what motivated the get your life in order, get your fitness in order, and that'll start to
Yeah.
propagate. But here it's when you can look at the system holistically and see how everything is in feedback with each other, you can start to pick, you can apply the concept of leverage and say, okay, everything may be in feedback with each other, but not every system equally influences every system as much. And I think that's why we still see guys who are like very, very accomplished in their life, but then have trouble socially.
Right.
And so that's when it's easy to say, well, just become more accomplished, and then that change will propagate. But that's not always a high leverage change to be making.
Yeah.
So when you look at the systems level and you start tinkering, and then you combine it with the knowledge of leverage, you can really start prioritizing which actions will have the most downstream changes. And then that's how you really kind of maximize efficiency towards building the life that you want.
Yeah, definitely. It seems like the system of this recording is about to run out of battery.
Yeah.
So are there any final thoughts you want to wrap up with?
No, I think could you just give a quick spiel around why do we prioritize, why do we consider healing your internal world being such a high leverage activity as opposed to just telling guys, go get a six pack or go talk to 500 girls?
Yeah,
Women.
I think one of the big parts about that is it's something that paints every second of your experience, right? So funny enough, okay, this is a bit of a stupid example, but they have those height surgeries, right? Where if someone's really short, they can break your leg and increase your height, which is crazy. But
painful.
Super painful, probably very risky. Yeah. But why do guys do it, right? Because that belief that that height is not enough is there every single second. Now, for a guy who does that, we can see the effect of that belief very concretely. But for most people, it's not things like that that we can see with our own eyes, but it's more like an emotional dark cloud that you carry with you everywhere you go. So if we can work on the internal world, what happens is we shift the past, because the past is just visualizations of what we think happened, that we agree on.
Yeah.
That's why you may have a different memory of something I said than what I have as a memory, because we never fully accurately remember.
Yeah.
So in a way, we're creating that past in the current moment.
Yeah.
And then the present moment is affected by the thoughts and the feelings that we have. And then our present experience gets stored into our memory, and that affects how we do in the future, right? So in that sense, the internal world is always within a feedback loop with every other system. And it's not supposed to be like a big system encompassing everything, because I think all the other mini systems are also super valuable.
Yeah.
But there's a little bit of a hierarchy where it's in some ways more important, but there's more nuance there.
Yeah.
And that's what we recommend you guys to prioritize, so that from there, when you're building a foundation, it's very solid for the rest of the skills that you want to have in your life.
Yeah. And the thing you said about the past reminded me of this saying, no man enters the same river twice, because
Right.
it's not the same river and it's not the same man.
Right.
And it's like when you upgrade your beliefs, the past keeps changing because you keep looking at the past through different lens. And the same past that maybe once haunted you can now become actually a very empowering past that can propel you to future success.
Exactly. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you enjoyed this, check out the link below to see my exact system to get what you want in life without sacrificing your authenticity or your peace. We'll see you in the next one.